welcome to Amy's whistle-stop tour through the law. Today we are looking at what law actually is. This might sound pernickety and a bit of a pointless video, and you might think this is a really obvious question. Law is the code of conduct we abide by. It's the stuff of courtrooms, something inaccessible and dry and a bit outdated. Or maybe you're thinking there's not really much point to defining law. It applies to us either way, and defining it is for philosophers who've got nothing better to do than to speculate about abstract concepts while smoking a pipe and caressing a long beard. Well, my friend, pause for a second and just imagine that you were born into a world without any laws. Would you feel safe? Would your possessions be safe? How would society be structured? And would there be such a thing as society, or would we all just look out for ourselves? Would you survive? Maybe that's a bit cynical. What about if everyone was good? Would you still need law? Because surely no one's harming you. You're safe. But who decides what good means? What if I think it's good to have a society where everyone fulfills a role to maximise productivity, and you think it's good to have the freedom to do what you want? We can't fulfil both definitions, but it would be impossible to enforce anything without the coercive grasp of the law. Now, this man here, Mr. Thomas Hobbes, was famous for much, much more than just a very receding hairline. He thought that at heart we are selfish, violent and immoral, so a life without law is solitary, nasty, brutish and short. What a cynical guy. But when you think about it, without a legal notion of property, who's going to decide who gets the nice house? Who gets the gold ring? Hobbes thinks it would be one big free-for-all, and a weakling like me would end up with nothing, and to be quite frank, probably dead. But are we really savage beasts at heart, with no compassion, no thought for others, and no heart? Hobbes would say yes. Respect is not something you're born with. But John Locke thought otherwise. If morality is the chicken, and the law is the egg, John Locke would suggest that a rather primitive morality came before the metaphorical egg of the law. For even without laws, humans had the potential to exist in a relatively harmonious state, as the empathy and the desire to survive which we all possess created a form of moral code. But still, for both Locke and Hobbes, we have the issue of what to do with the nice houses and the food. Do we really think we'd settle for living in a cave when we could have the Kardashian mansion, for instance? How do we resolve this? Law. But law didn't just appear one day. It must have had coercive origins, or how else would you get everyone to follow it? To give up their ability to use physical force against others, to end their quest to attain the Kardashian mansion. And if you think about how society is structured in England and in many other countries, like France before the revolutions, we had a monarchy. One very powerful family who had immense and total power over all citizens. Sorry, I said we had a monarchy. In the UK, we still do have a monarchy. And here's Henry VIII, for instance. I chose this picture because there's something slightly bovine about his heft, his bulkiness. He exudes power and privilege, and I wouldn't dream of messing with him. You didn't question where these monarchs got their power from, because they said they had divine right, which means their powers came from God. The laws were the will of the monarch, usually enforced by the nobility. Taxation laws were particularly strict on the poor and lenient to the rich, but that was just the way of life. Law was law, and you followed it or you faced the consequences. The Enlightenment came along, also known as the Age of Reason. It was a period of scientific advancement, political discourse and philosophical debate which formed the foundations for a total overhaul of society. Down went the French monarchy, down went divine right, and down went despotic laws like the Lettre de Cachet, which is a French law, so I should have said Lettre de Cachet, where the king could detain people indefinitely at his will. And it was in this period that Parliament gained power in the UK, and the judiciary became separate. So what is law now? Positivists see the law as a system of commands backed by sanctions. The law keeps order. You abide by the law set out by those in control, else you face some kind of sanction. The law is not necessarily coherent, it's not necessarily fair, it's not necessarily reasonable, but the law is the will of the sovereign and therefore we follow it. And although this might seem quite a stripped back idea of what law is, if you got stopped by a policeman for speeding, they wouldn't say, "Oh, it's fine, no one else was on the road, you're let off." No matter how pointless the law is, it is law and you have to follow it. Any law passed through the recognised lawmaking process is law, no matter if it's immoral, evil or wrong. Law is law. And it's a closed legal system, meaning it is separate from external influences and can be understood without looking to outside sources. If you go on gov.uk, you can find legislation. Positivists think that that is what law is. It doesn't need to be moral or even linked to morality. Alternatively, law can be seen as a regulatory mechanism founded upon a moral view of society, because laws don't operate in a vacuum. As members of a society, we need law to advance freedom and equality by instilling order and protecting the basic rights of man. As Locke said, the end of the law is not to abolish or restrain, but to preserve and enlarge freedom. We agree to the law as part of the social contract, where we confer our capacity to judge, to harm, and to take the freedom of others to an impartial governing body. Lon Fuller set out his rules of recognition, saying that laws can't be uncertain, they can't be kept from the public, they can't be retroactive, incomprehensible, or impossible to perform, because law, as a means of social control, needs to be capable of being followed. Defective law severely lacks in its claim to be obeyed, and if people don't have confidence in a law, then it loses every sense of its purpose, because people won't follow it and it won't be enforced. So it is effectively not law in every sense but the semantic one. Joseph Raz suggests that law is a means of collectively achieving goals that wouldn't be possible as individuals. Laws can advance equality, for instance, and protect people from harm in a way that couldn't be achieved on an individual basis. Law enables the inherent worth of citizens to be realised and respected. Jeremy Bentham offers a totally opposite but equally collectivist idea of law, and another interesting hairstyle. He thinks that law should follow the principle of utility and promote the greatest good to the greatest number of people. This is indirectly seen in democratic elections, where the party that gets the most votes has most of the lawmaking power, meaning the will of the majority is followed. From a Marxist perspective, the law is an oppressive tool, maintaining the position of the ruling class, and there are very low education levels in those incarcerated in prisons, and offences such as stealing can lead to the detention of people who have a grievous lack of resources to begin with, protecting those with plentiful supplies. It maintains the current distribution model both in land and in wealth. From a feminist perspective, we see a system of law that has entirely excluded women for centuries. Women were subsumed into the voices, the status, and the identity of their husbands and male counterparts. It wasn't until 1991 that marital rape was made illegal, and some laws are still framed in masculine manners now. An example of this is the murder defence loss of control. When women lose control, it's typically as a result of sustained abuse and not a kind of instantaneous loss of control. It often occurs sometime after the provocation, whilst men tend to have a more instant reaction to provocation. The defence is framed according to the masculine model. Now, there is no clear answer to what law is, but maybe the question of what is law is a dead end, drowning us in definitions of law and detracting from more important questions. In looking at what is law, we've also seen why we need law, who is a subject of the law, the impact of context, and where law is found, finding that it's ubiquitous, multifaceted, and more than just a statute book. Law impacts every single citizen. We have a responsibility to follow the law, and we have a responsibility to question the law and keep lawmakers in check to prevent it being used as a tool for oppression. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.